Hello students, today we are going to discuss the poem Preludes in detail. As I have already told you that this is one of the famous poem of T.S. Eliot. At first glance, the preludes may therefore appear to be a faithful representation of urban life, as it is without irrelevant comment. The objectivity and detachment of the speaker are, however, deceptive, as everything in the poem is imbued with his perceptions and told from his perspective. The speaker writes down what he experiences while walking in the city. The hustle and bustle of everyday life has clouded their view to such an extent that they can only grasp fragments of reality. The word prelude comes from the Middle French word prelude, which means notes sung or played to test the voice or instrument, which is derived from medieval Latin preludium. Prelude, preliminary, from Latin preludere, to play beforehand, for practice, preface, from pre, before, plus luder, to play. It was first used in the purely musical sense in English in the 1650s, Oxford Dictionary. In this poem, the title preludes could refer to any and all of those meaning testing the voice, a prelude to a longer work, before a play, or preface to a musical piece. The poem begins with, the winter evening settles down with the smell of sticks in passageways. 6 o'clock, the burnt out ends of smoky days, and now a gusty shower rapes the grimy scraps of withered leaves about your feet, a newspaper from vacant lots. The showers beat on broken blinds and chimney pots, and at the corner of the street, a lonely cab horse steams and stamps, and then the lightning of the lamps. The first prelude of the poem is set on a winter evening in a city, at the time of day when people are returning home from work during a rainstorm. It's a dirty, sinister, pungent, lonely place filled with waste. Motifs are introduced that continue throughout the poem: time, light, newspapers, discarded and broken objects, the street and vacant lots. The cozy domesticity and occasional rhyming meter is disrupted by images of desolation and routine depersonalization. The phrase "the winter evening settles down" is an example of the personification in which the feeling of the characters or speakers are embodied by inanimate objects. The winter evening experiences an orderly transition from day to night. It situates a poem at a particular time of day in a particular time of year. Winter at dusk. The first two lines are written in iambic tetrameter of four emphasized syllables: da dum, da dum, da dum, da dum, beginning with a pleasant ordered musicality in the language, which is subsequently disrupted in the poem. Lines 2 and 4 rhymes, but lines 1 and 3 don't. In a free verse form that occasionally comes to order, the first four lines have a repeated as sound in the words settles, smells, seeks, passageways, six, and smoky and days. The word passageways places the speaker in a city. The reference to 6 o'clock is part of a motif of time in the poem, including the mention of evening, the ends of the days, and the lighting of the lamps, the time when it's get dark. 6 o'clock is the time of day when people come home from work, eat, and transition to sleep. The voice of the poem seems to be located not inside eating with the worker, but outside in the passageways, suggesting alienation from everyday life. The burnt out ends of smoky days is a metaphor which compares the time of day to the ashes of a cigarette butt. The adjective smoky also adds a dirty quality to the image, describing the air pollution in industrialized cities. When burning coal for fuel was common, the tone is melancholic. Imagine the bleak nature of a day filled with smoke. Ending in exhaustion, Smoking a cigarette is also habitual, like all of the behavior of these urban workers. In the third line, the poem uses the second person, bringing the reader into the poem as you is introduced. Grimy, withered, and vacant are emotive adjectives that judge the leaves and newspapers to be dirty, depressing, and empty. The overall tone of the poem is of desolation. In lines 9 and 10, the alliteration of beat, broken, and blinds create the sensation of rain falling on buildings in disrepair. The alliteration continues with stamps and stamps, returning to the sinister sibilance of the first few lines. Line 12 ends with a full stop at a period which brings us to pause longer at the image of the cab horse. Line 13 is set apart on the page, given more space, which points out its importance. Even as it rhymes with the line above relating the two images to each other, the and then, places it next in chronological time. This is the moment when night has fallen. The lighting of the lamps refers to the lighting of gas street lamps. It begins the motif of light in the poem. The morning comes to consciousness of faint, stale smells of beer from the sawdust trampled street with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands with the other masquerades that time resumes. One thinks of all the hens that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. The second prelude takes place in the morning, which smells and looks disgusting. City dwellers are reduced to symbols of their work, feet, and hands moving repetitiously. They act as if in a play with only a pretense of meaning, and their lives are all the same. Eliot wrote those poems early in his career, so you can think of these short preludes as testing the voice of a new poet. They can also be seen in the larger trajectory of Eliot's biography as works that preceded his longer poems and established the themes of his poetry. Each of the four stanzas is a vignette set either in the evening or in the morning, which in the industrial city are both devoted to preparation, for this act as a prelude to the main act of work. Thinking of a prelude theatrically also fits with some of the imagery of the poem, which raises a curtain on pictures of modern life. As the last prelude alludes to Christianity, this suggests another meaning for the word prelude, the period before the second coming when the world is waiting for the return of the Messiah to bring back meaning. The morning is the subject, and it is conscious of the smells of the city. The imagery of smells of streaks in passageways of the evening in the first stanza is replaced here with the day after imagery of faint stale smells of beer. It places the poem in time, the morning, through sensory experiences of orderly narcotic food and drink consumption. The stimulant of coffee replaces the depressant of beer. The S sound incomes consciousness, stale, smell, sawdust, street, and its tense echo the sibilance of the first stanza. The street then becomes a subject with feet that belong to it. In two Sindache, all its muddy feet and all the hands that are raising dingy shades, body parts come to represent working class city dwellers, implying that they are merely the sum of their repetitious actions and that they are passive slaves to the city. The poem extends the observation to the entire city and generalizes it through the hyperbole. 1,000 furnished rooms are cheap and impersonal. This points to the uniformity and degradation of lives living in a city organized by clock time. By implication, the poem seems nostalgic for a simpler, cleaner, and more individual human lifestyle before industrialization, a pastoral idea. As the shades are raised, the emotive adjectives sawdust, trampled, muddy, and dingy make the city feel disgusting. The injab lines offer no respite, as the reader's senses are overwhelmed without pause. The metaphor with the other masquerades suggests that the people of the city are playing roles, wearing masks, pretending to have a meaningful life, with the claim that time resumes to masquerades. Time is personified as the director of the play of the city life. This time is industrial time, mechanically organized by the clock. The speaker, the one who thinks, seems depressed at his reasons. You toss a blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited. You dozed and watch the night revealing the thousand sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling, and when all the world come back and the light crept up between the shutters, and you heard the sparrows in the gutters. You had such a vision of the streets as the street hardly understands, sitting along the bath's edges where you curl the papers from your hair or clasp the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. The third prelude introduces a character who the speaker addresses directly. She lies awake at night thinking of her debased life. Then at dawn she experiences a consciousness of the world as she prepares for her day. This stanza is written in the second person, speaking directly to you. A subject who, in the first 6 lines, lies awake at night with insomnia. The subject is lying on her back. Critics have read this character as a prostitute. The second line could refer to waiting for a customer. In the third line, the night is personified as the morning was in the second stanza. It also ironic that the night is revealing since it is dark as opposed to light, which usually reveals the thousand sordid images, is a metaphor for the smutty imagination of a debased woman. It echoes the thousand furnished rooms, but this time, rather than being hyperbolic, it diminishes her soul, which should be infinite, to a finite number of images. Her soul has the qualities of a dream, but plays while she is awake. But in the dark of night, the sordid image is also not to the genre of this poem. It is an imagist poem. Imagism was an organized modernist literary movement led by Eliot's friend and editor Ezra Pound, and in which Eliot participated. The poem takes a longer pause after the play of images on the ceiling with a period, so that you may linger there and imagine. The next 3 lines all begin with and but no punctuation, suggesting a rapid sequence of perception. All the world is personified. It left in the night but come back in the morning. The light is also personified as a snaky subject who creeps and is blocked by the shutters. Then it turns from a sight impression to a sound impression. With you heard the sparrows in the gutters. Hearing the sound of birds is a symbol of spring in classical poetry, but here they are the most drab birds, sparrows in the most lowly urban setting. The gutters, the world is bleak as her soul. Then there is a complex line. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understand. The street here is a metonym for the world. It is also another example of personification, and sends us back to the sawdust trampled street in stanza second. Since we learn in that stanza that the feet of the pedestrians belong to the street through Sindoche, the people of the city also belong to the street, but the street is dumb. It hardly understands its power, but this woman, even with her limited soul, has the consciousness to see for a moment a vision of the street and so the world. She starts to get ready for the day, removing the papers from her hair, which were used as a cheap way to get a curl. The papers also echo the newspapers from vacant lots. In the first stanza, notice that the poem refers to your hair but not your feet. It is possible that the yellow soles of feet are not her own but those of a male customer. This image also continues the persistent motif of feet and hands, which, especially when described as yellow and solid, describe working class people by the appendage which allowed them to do dirty work. This language can be read as insufferably classist, but there is also a sympathetic, imaginative gesture in granting this woman a soul with a vision. The fourth prelude, written several years after the others, introduces Christian imagery. Christ is imaged in the sky, blocked by the city and the street, trod upon by pedestrians. The poem returns to the evening routine of the working class. Numbed by nicotine and news, the speaker then gets personal about his emotional experience of a religious impulse intertwined with his poetic imagination. Then he dismisses these fancies with an embarrassed gesture and ends with an image representing a spiritual void. His soul stretched right across the skies that fade behind a city block or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, and short square fingers stuffing pipes and evening newspapers and eyes, assured of certain certainties, the conscience of a blackened street. Impatient to assume the world, I am moved by fancies that are curl. Around these images I cling the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Wipe your hands across your mouth and laugh, the world revolve like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots. Prelude 4 introduces a new male character in the third person. Also with a soul, his soul is either stretched or tremble, and thus is enduring discomfort. But the scale of his soul and the horizontal image of its being stretched across the sky suggest a religious allusion to Christ's cruciform position. The street, the character personified as a word in stanza second and third, is being trampled by the now familiar syndache of feet. This image of the street taking the suffering of the world also becomes a metaphor for Christ's suffering. The skies, a symbol of heaven. This implies that the spiritual is fading and neglected in the modern city, but also immanent within it. The poem has returned to the evening as in the first prelude. It continues the sibilant as sound pattern of the first two stanzas with the words soul stretched across skies, city, insistent, six, short, square, stuffing, etc. The adjective insistent suggests that the city dwellers are acting out of willful desire, likely to return home after work, and too busy to pause and notice that they are trampling the meaning of life beneath their feet. The motif of time returns with 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, but before the time was particular, now it has multiplied. The insistent feet, short square fingers, and eyes are all syndache, instrumental appendages acting in undifferentiated plural masses. The evening newspapers are a metronome for the cyclical, unchanging wastefulness of urban life and for its narcotic effect on people. Like the tobacco in the pipes, we remember from earlier stanzas that the newspapers will become culling devices to contribute to the masquerade of a prostitute here, and ends up as garbage blowing in a vacant lots around the feet of commuting pedestrians. This is a depressing judgment of human intellect as wasted on daily mindlessly comforting entertainment. Assured of a certain certainties, represent a paradox because the newspaper are telling us certain certainties, not the real whole truth. Here it is blackened, implying dirt and degradation, but has a conscience again. This imagines the ethical spiritual presence of Christ within the streets of the city, being trod upon but waiting impatiently to begin to have power or responsibility for the world. The poem stops fully here with a period and a line break for the reader to fully comprehend the image. The voice then changes to the first person perspective. I am moved. This makes the observation personal. The speaker steps back and talk about how he feels, about how his imagination reacts to the images he himself has described in the poem. The verb curls echoes the curls in the hair of the prostitute in Prelude Third. It is describing the way a particular human imagination works. There are images around which notions cling. Images come first, but fancies embraces these images. With the phrase, some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing, the speaker returns to religious allusions referring to the infinite gentleness and suffering of Christ. The parallelism of repeating infinitely creates a pattern to emphasize the boundless nature of the notion. There is also an analytical mind here at work that labels these religious impulses as fancies and a notion. So, in this movement, Eliot both expresses a religious desire that he experiences as inextricably bounded up in his vision of city life and intellectually distances himself from his emotion. By ending the line with things, the speaker satisfies the ear with a rhyme for cling. The speaker then returns to the second person with wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh. This gesture expresses embarrassment. It's a self directive, a contemptuous order uttered by the analytical intellect toward the self who was moved by religious fancies. The words revolve like ancient women. It is the only simile in the poem, so it stands apart and has extra gravitas. Remember, when all the world came back with the sun in stanza third, so the world vanishes and returns with the sun, that is with daylight and human perception. Religious fancies in the human imagination were impatient to take command over the meaning of the world, but in the end, the world revolves. It moves circularly without end. The preludes continue over and over without the advent of meaning, a Messiah who would break through the meaningless cycle of life and death. Ancient refers to the old problem of the human condition. Women are physical representation of the cycle of the life because they give birth. The last image is a paradox because they gather substance to burn to light the world so they can see it, keep warm, and cook their food. There is nothing of real substance there. The world is a spiritual void, yet we continue to live in it. This describes a meaningless existence. The poem ends in despair, but the upwelling of religious hope at the beginning of the last stanza will return in Eliot's later poem, The Waste Land. In the next class, we will discuss Indian poets and Indian poems. Thank you.